Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The barrel of a suppressed pistol pressed cold against my temple, a sensation that should have terrified me. Yet all I could focus on was the scent of expensive bourbon and gunpowder radiating from the man holding it. Give me one reason why I shouldn't paint this office with your blood, Julian. Dante hissed, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through my chest, triggering a dangerous heat in the pit of my stomach that had no business existing during an assassination attempt. I didn't flinch. I just looked up into eyes the color of storm clouds. Eyes I had spent 20 years pretending to hate, and whispered the words that had been burning a hole in my sanity for the last 48 hours. Because, Dante, in scenario 41, you kissed me before you pulled the trigger. To understand how the head of the Thorn Syndicate ended up on his knees at gunpoint before his sworn enemy, you have to understand the nature of the war between our families. The Thorns and the Kales were the twin pillars of the city's underworld aristocracy. We didn't deal in petty crimes. We dealt in governments, information, and high-tech weaponry. Dante Kale and I were the crown princes of this rotting kingdom. We had been childhood friends before the Great Schism, the night our fathers turned on each other and bathed the city in red. Since then, for 15 years, Dante and I had been circling each other like sharks. He was the brute force, the terrifying enforcer with a body built for violence and a face carved by angels. I was the brain, the ice-cold strategist who killed with a signature rather than a blade. I thought I knew everything about my enemy. I thought I knew everything about myself. I was wrong. It began on a Tuesday, amidst the torrential rain that seemed to perpetually drown our city. I was in my sister Isolde's private quarters. Isolde was the Thorn family's chief intelligence officer, a genius hacker and psychological profiler. She was currently in Europe securing a deal, leaving her servers unguarded. I was looking for dirt. Rumors were circulating that the Kales were moving on the West District, and I needed leverage. I bypassed her firewalls with a brother's intuition and accessed her private drive. There, hidden beneath layers of quantum encryption, was a folder labeled Project, Red String, Predictive Behavioral Analysis. It sounded like a weapon, a psychological warfare tool designed to predict our enemy's moves. I opened it, expecting tactical maps or blackmail material on Dante. Instead, I found a manuscript. It wasn't data. It was prose. Thousands of words. At first, I was confused. The document was titled The Prince and the Wolf. I began to read, assuming it was some sort of coded message. Dante pinned Julian against the mahogany desk, his hand tangling in Julian's pristine silver hair. The hatred between them was a physical weight, breathless and consuming. I hate you, Julian breathed, though his body betrayed him, arching into the touch. Liar, Dante growled, capturing his mouth in a kiss that tasted of ruin and salvation. I froze. My breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't a code. It wasn't a tactical analysis. It was fanfiction. My brilliant, terrifying sister, the woman who could topple governments with a laptop, had written a 300-page romance novel about me and my mortal enemy. I should have closed it. I should have deleted the file and purged the server. I was Julian Thorn, a man of iron discipline. I did not indulge in fantasies, and I certainly didn't harbor feelings for the man who had tried to blow up my car last month. But I kept reading. Isolde's writing was visceral. She knew us too well. She described the way Dante walked, a predator's prowl. She described the way I tapped my fingers when I was nervous, a habit I thought no one noticed. But more terrifying than the accuracy was the dynamic she painted. In her story, the animosity between us wasn't hatred. It was repressed desire, a fire so hot it had calcified into ice to survive. She wrote about the phantom limb phenomenon, how Dante and I, separated by the feud, were two halves of a whole, constantly reaching for each other through violence because it was the only touch allowed. I read until sunrise. I read scenes of vulnerability where I bandaged Dante's wounds. I read scenes of raw, explosive passion in safe houses and boardrooms. You are the only person who can kill me, Julian, fictional Dante said in chapter 12. Because you are the only one I would let get close enough. I shut the tablet, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The terrifying part wasn't the fiction. It was the resonance. It was the sudden, horrifying realization that when I looked at Dante across the negotiation table, I didn't want to strangle him. I wanted to possess him. Isolde hadn't written a fantasy. She had written a diagnosis. 2 days later, the annual summit arrived. It was neutral ground, the Grand Opera House, where the crime families met to discuss territory. I walked into the ballroom wearing my armor. A bespoke 3-piece suit, midnight blue, tailored to razor-sharp perfection. My face was a mask of indifference. But inside, I was unraveling. Every time I blinked, I saw the words from Isolde's manuscript. Then I saw him. Dante Cale stood near the champagne tower. He was wearing black as always. He was broader than I remembered, his shoulders straining against the fabric of his jacket. His dark hair was swept back, revealing the sharp, aggressive line of his jaw. He turned. His eyes locked onto mine. Usually that look conveyed a threat. Stay out of my way, Thorn. But tonight, filtered through the lens of the story I had devoured, I saw something else. I saw the intensity, the obsession. He wasn't looking at me like an enemy. He was looking at me like I was the only thing in the room that mattered. I forced myself to walk toward him. The crowd parted. The air grew heavy, charged with the static electricity of our proximity. Thorn, Dante greeted, his voice rough. Cale, I replied. My voice was steady, but my pulse was deafening in my ears. You look adequate. Dante smirked, a dangerous, lopsided thing that made my knees weak. High praise coming from the Ice Queen. In the story, Chapter 7, this was where he would step closer and smell the cologne on my neck. Dante stepped closer. He inhaled deeply. My breath hitched. He's doing it. He's actually doing it. Sandalwood and cold steel, Dante murmured, low enough that only I could hear. You haven't changed. Why would I change for you? I snapped, defensiveness flaring. You seem flushed, Julian. Dante noted, his eyes narrowing as they dropped to my lips. Fever. Something like that, I muttered. The lights flickered. The explosion wasn't in the ballroom. It was in the basement, shaking the foundation of the opera house. Screams erupted. The heavy chandeliers swung violently. Ambush! Someone screamed. Gunfire erupted from the balcony levels. A third faction, the Rossi family, trying to decapitate both our organizations in one stroke. Dante didn't think. He moved. He lunged at me, tackling me to the marble floor just as a hail of bullets decimated the spot where I had been standing. We slid across the polished stone, his heavy body shielding mine. Get off me, I hissed, though I was clutching his lapels. Shut up and move, Dante roared. He hauled me up, grabbing my wrist. His grip was iron, burning my skin, and dragged me toward the service exit. We fought our way through the kitchen, Dante dropping 2 assailants with terrifying efficiency. He moved like water and fire, brutal and beautiful. I covered his flank, using my own sidearm to take out a gunman on the catwalk. We burst into the back alley, the rain soaking us instantly. My car is 3 blocks down, Dante shouted over the thunder. My extraction team is on the roof, I countered. The roof is a kill zone, you idiot. Dante grabbed me by the back of the neck, forcing me behind a dumpster as bullets chipped the brick wall above our heads. We go to my safe house. It's closer. I didn't argue. We ran. The safe house was a penthouse apartment in the derelict industrial district. It was dusty, filled with crates of ammunition and a single leather couch. Dante kicked the door shut and engaged the magnetic locks. He slumped against the door, sliding down until he hit the floor. Blood was seeping through his white shirt. You're hit, I said, the panic rising in my throat, sharp and sudden. Graze, Dante grunted, closing his eyes. Ribs. Hurts like a bitch. I knelt beside him, my hands trembling. This was chapter 15. The safe house. The wound. In the story, This is where Julian realizes he would burn the world down to keep Dante alive. I ripped his shirt open, buttons scattering across the floor. The wound was a jagged tear along his side. Deep but not fatal. "I need whiskey and a sewing kit," I ordered, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Dante gestured to a cabinet. I worked in silence, cleaning the wound with the alcohol. Dante watched me, his gaze heavy, unblinking. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a raw, exposed nerve of tension. "You're shaking," Dante observed quietly. "I am cold," I lied. "You're a terrible liar, Julian." Dante reached out, his calloused hand catching my chin, forcing me to look at him. "Why did you freeze in the ballroom? Before the blast? You looked at me like you'd seen a ghost." I froze. The proximity was overwhelming. I could feel his body heat radiating off him. I was kneeling between his spread legs, my hands on his bare chest, his blood on my fingers. "I read it," I whispered. The confession slipped out before I could stop it. "Read what?" "Isolde's file. The encryption key I broke last week." Dante's eyes widened slightly. "The blackmail file?" I knew she had something. "It wasn't blackmail," I said, my voice trembling. "It was a narrative, a simulation of us." Dante frowned. "A war simulation? A relationship simulation?" Dante went still. The silence in the room stretched, thick and suffocating. "What?" "She wrote a story, Dante. A story where we aren't enemies. Where we belong to each other." I looked down at his chest, watching the rise and fall of his breathing. And the terrifying thing wasn't reading it. The terrifying thing was that it made sense. It made more sense than this war. It made more sense than hating you. I looked up. Dante was staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. Shock? Disgust? "Tell me," Dante whispered, his voice hoarse. "What happened in the story?" "We stopped fighting," I said softly. "We realized that the only people on Earth who understand the monsters we are is each other." Dante's hand moved from my chin to the back of my neck. His thumb stroked the sensitive skin there. And you kissed me." Dante's eyes darkened, the pupils blowing wide, swallowing the gray. The air left the room. "Like this?" Dante asked. He didn't wait for an answer. He pulled me down. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was 15 years of repressed rage, rivalry, and desperate loneliness crashing together. His lips were hot, demanding, tasting of whiskey and copper. I made a noise in the back of my throat, a sound of surrender, and gripped his shoulders, deepening the kiss. It was exactly like the story, and it was infinitely better. The fiction had described the action, but it hadn't described the feeling of Dante Cale's soul seemingly wrapping around mine, anchoring me. It hadn't described the relief, the sheer, overwhelming relief of finally putting down the sword. Dante broke the kiss, gasping for air, his forehead resting against mine. "I'm going to kill Isolde," he muttered, though there was no heat in it. "Why?" I panted, my lips swollen. "Because she figured it out before I did." Dante laughed, a low, broken sound. "I've wanted to do that since we were 18, Julian. I thought I was insane. I thought you'd put a bullet in my head. I might still," I threatened, but my hands were tangling in his hair, refusing to let go. "Try it." Dante shifted, wincing at the pain in his side but pulling me closer until I was straddling his lap, careful of his injury. "So what happens next in the story? Do we ride off into the sunset?" "No," I said, looking at the man who had been my enemy, my rival, and was now, terrifyingly, my partner. "In the story, we burn the other families to the ground. Together." Dante grinned, the predator returning, but this time, the wolf was on my side. "I like that ending." "It wasn't the ending," I corrected him, leaning back in to brush my lips against his. "It was the beginning. We spent the night in that safe house, not sleeping. We talked. We mapped out the destruction of the Rossi family. And in the quiet moments, Between the planning of war, we explored this new, fragile territory between us. The bestie from my childhood was gone. The enemy was dead. In their place was something complex, dangerous, and irrevocably mine. When morning came, we walked out of that building. Not as two rival warlords, but as a united front. The city thought the Thorn and Kale families were at war. They were about to learn that the only thing more dangerous than our hatred was our love. Isolde's fanfiction had been wrong about one thing, though. She wrote that our love would be a tragedy. As I watched Dante load his weapon, catching my eye with a wink that promised trouble, I knew she was wrong. This wasn't a tragedy. It was a conquest. And that is how the Prince of Ice finally let the wolf in. If you enjoyed watching Julian finally surrender to his desires, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you trust a lover who used to be your worst enemy? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,